The amazing thing this last week is that you and Pamela Butler, whom I've never met or talked to, both sent me labs. And I thought this is an incredible coincidence because Pamela is 60 years old and she was taking a testosterone replacement cream. She got, once she started ice baths, she got a 10x boost. And I think, well, she's ready to discontinue the cream. We have to see where will her body settle in if she's not using hormone replacement therapy because she doesn't have ovaries. I mean, she went into surgical menopause like 20 years ago when her ovaries were removed. But since then, I've learned that the adrenal glands, the fat cells, the skin cells in a woman's body can all contribute up to 3/4 of the total testosterone. So she might not suffer from the loss of ovaries at all if she's doing cold practice, and she could have normal, healthy testosterone levels. So that was like a revelation. And then your labs come in and you're saying, yeah, but I didn't really get that big a boost. Eloise, you doubled your testosterone. I mean, almost. I'm like, this is incredible. So,
I know.
the,
You know what's hard though is the metrics in which they're written they were obviously never meant for a lay person to interpret. And so I've found them incredibly difficult to translate, essentially. And I know that in the US you tend to go by uh is it nanograms per deciliter, whereas everything in the UK that I use is reported in nanomoles per liter. So not only have I got to understand what that means first, but then I had to do the translation as to, okay, well, Pamela's was that. What is mine in that metric? So yeah, it was interesting, but I did have to, it was actually following our podcast with you last November after we were talking about female reproductive health and fertility and the rates of fertility across men and women declining. And I am 32 and I don't have children yet. It's not something on my immediate horizon. And I'm thinking, well, how do I ensure that should I want to make that decision at some point in the near future, or, you know, in the next 5 years' time, that I'm putting my body in the best state to be, you know, the most fertile that I can be. And as we, I think, both have listened to a lot of Andrew Huberman, but done a little bit of external work from that as well. One of the things you can choose to optimize for is your metabolism. And if you're choosing to optimize for your metabolism, what are you doing in order to make that better? And so, I mean, to be honest, I'm otherwise fit, I'm healthy, and I was just interested to play around a little bit with it.
then you did what most people don't bother with. You drew your blood and you got tested before you started this practice of ice baths. And then I think it was maybe 6 or 7 months, you said, okay, I'll get tested again. Tell me about the kinds of labs that you decided you needed or that you wanted when you're embarking on this new experiment on yourself.
So it was an even shorter time period. It was 4 months. And I did just one of those at home finger prick test kits. It's a company here called Fourth, and I found it online. I actually used them way back in 2021. So I had some other biomarker results, which was an interesting reference point, but I'd never done these sort of the sex hormone biomarkers. I'd never done that. Occasionally they came up with estrogen, but testosterone isn't one that's included for women in like a standard pack. So I had to select for it. And so I decided beginning of the year, following our conversation, I'll do my bloods. And it was really hard, Thomas, because we had just bought an ice bath, but it's not a Morozko. Unfortunately, it's just a little tub, a metal tub that we fill with hose water. But I can tell you in London, it gets cold enough to dip into, particularly in January. So I was waiting for my kit to come, and my partner had already started dipping in the ice bath, and I was so jealous because I couldn't get in yet, because otherwise I would mess my results up. So I was really, really keen to have sort of a clean start. So I did my blood, sent them off, and it's critical for it was critical for me to do it at the right part of my cycle. So I actually did it, or at least that the two measurements were taken at the same point. So I did 3 days, the third day of my cycle was the day that I did my bloods, and the same the second time around as well. And so I go 4 months. I'm doing our little cold plunges 2 to 3 times a week. I started daily, and if I'm completely honest, it was too much for me. I got a bit unwell. And I was like, you know what, I don't think I need to do this every day in order to receive the benefit. Whether that's I'm doing it for my head, my body, obviously the immediate mood boosting effects you get from it are the ones that are so easy to tell why you're doing this. But the things that are happening inside are take a little bit longer to measure. So I did my second lot of results. So after the 2-3 times a week, these were varying temperatures of the ice bath. I would say anywhere between 2 and 8 degrees Celsius. And my total testosterone went from 0.6 nanomoles per liter to 1.1. So almost a 2x. Change, which is, I think, 17 to 31 nanograms per deciliter, just to do the translation. But what was interesting, my estrogen also went up 3x, which was surprising. I was only really looking at testosterone just as sort of this is a sort of interesting exercise. I'll play around with it a little bit. And my estrogen went up significantly. And I had no sort of, having done this, as I said before, I had no reference point of like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? My sister has polycystic ovaries. So all I've had in my head my whole life was, she's my stepsister, so we're not related, but she's had this. And so all I've really heard is, oh, high testosterone is bad. It's bad. But I'm, starting to come around to is it dependent on where your baseline started? Because if you're low, there are no established measures for women as to optimal testosterone levels. That's not established, at least not that
I agree.
I know of.
The lab reports, the units are so frustrating to try and translate. And the lab reports will only give you like, you're in the green range, whatever the green range means. And the range on some reports from the bottom of what they call normal to the top of what they call normal is so wide that it encompasses like 90% of the population, and they cut off these bell curves and they say, oh, well, you're normal. But Eloise, I don't want normal anymore, because normal is sick. And so you go from 0.5 to 1.1, and your lab reporters say, oh, it's all green, you're fine. But that doesn't mean that you're where you want to be, just because you can be compared to this other really broad range of population. Who says that 0.5 is where you should be for a 32-year-old woman who's thinking, well, maybe I'm ready to plan a family? When you compare yourself to your stepsister with PCOS, PCOS is cysts that develop around the ovaries. They can overstimulate the ovaries and produce too much testosterone. And so when you're thinking about her health, you get this idea, well, if it's too much testosterone, that's associated with PCOS. But it's backwards. That is, the PCOS is metabolic in its origins, and it causes the high testosterone levels. It's not an artifact of high testosterone. When your stepsister gets her metabolism right, the odds are that her testosterone will come down. So if she gets in the cold plunge and she's doing regular cold plunge therapy, she will recruit new brown fat. She will improve her insulin sensitivity. Her PCS may resolve. And surprisingly, her testosterone come down to a level that is healthy for her. And that might be a different level than yours. All of this is confusing because if you oversimplify the message and you say, oh, well, cold plunge therapy will raise testosterone levels in women, only if they're too low. It won't take a woman with PCOS and elevated testosterone that is associated with that and raise her up even further. The cold therapy will modulate the testosterone levels in women. And that means if you're too low, it will bring you up. If you're too high because of PCOS, it will bring you back down. The estrogen effects are something brand new. Pamela Butler also reported a big jump in her estradiol. And this kind of makes sense because testosterone and estrogen, they're related. You can't move one without moving the other. But the relationship between estrogen and brown fat, a new paper just landed in my inbox. And this was a study in mice. And these researchers in China, they said, well, we're going to administer exogenous estrogen to these mice, and we're going to see what happens to their thermogenic fat. So there's white fat, which is not thermogenic, brown fat, which is packed full of mitochondria, and that's responsible for non-shivering thermogenesis. But there's something in between called beige fat. And these are fat cells that perform some of the function of brown, even though structurally they have a lot of similar characteristics to white. They have extra mitochondria. So I'm calling them thermogenic fat. The administration of the estrogen to these mice activated their thermogenic fat and improved its function. And they said, wow, isn't this incredible? What they didn't say is that it can also work the other way, that this relationship between thermogenic fat and estrogen is a two-way street. You can either stimulate your thermogenic fat with estrogen, or you can stimulate it with cold and produce more estrogen. All of this is brand new. You can't go to medical school and take a course in this. You can't find the single, most erudite, learned researcher working on this because these puzzle pieces are just emerging in the science now.
God, it's fascinating, isn't it? What we think we know, but how much we just don't know about
I
what's
think
happening
so.
inside our bodies. It's completely wild to me. But I think the greatest um, confidence I take from things like this, which, if I'm honest, was just a trial of my own body, an experiment, if you will, on myself. Um, cohort study of one. But it's just how much agency you have over editing your own profiles, whatever that is. And I have to say that alongside what I was doing, I also did a body tracks analysis. So these are the ones that you have in the gym. I don't know how accurate they are, but it's the best representation that I had access to. So I did that. And I did it on the same day I did my bloods. So same day I did my bloods both times. And throughout the 4 months, I didn't change anything in respect to diet. That didn't change. And I didn't really change anything except I slightly shifted to more strength-based workouts. And that was because I am interested in increasing my muscle mass, because it is so protective for so many of the functions that we need on a daily basis, and then sort of in terms of health span and longevity as we age. So I was quite interested in making that shift and just seeing how my body responded. But I had so my total muscle mass increased 2%. My total fat mass reduced 2%. And my total bone mass that actually didn't change much. But the 2% up and 2% down, I found quite interesting because I don't think I've ever in such a short period had such a leap. And therefore, I mean, the only thing I did change was really the ice baths, was the cold exposure. I was doing the strength-based stuff before, like I've been doing that for a couple of years now. So, and I didn't do it immediately afterwards, because I know when you and Ben spoke before, you were speaking about the rewarming protocol, and like you were doing, your Persian warrior with your steel mace, and and Ben, when he does his, he rewarms afterwards with a small amount of exercise, say, like 4 to 6 minutes, or 6 to, depending on how long he's done and how cold it was, but he will rewarm. And I was trying to do it without rewarming, so letting my body rewarm itself. Which I tell you, Thomas, in February in London, sometimes I didn't get warm again. I was just sitting there shivering, but I was thinking about you, thinking, this is good. This is good. I'm activating my brown fat. So yeah, it was also interesting seeing the body tracks analysis as well.
So you were pleased with those results then? The fat going down and the muscle mass going up sounds like what you were going for.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Have you noticed a change in your mood?
I think there are short and long-term effects here. I would say the immediate, after I get out of the ice bath, or I mean, when I'm in it, but when I get out, a couple of hours afterwards, I'm flying high. I feel so good. I honestly, I just feel like I could do anything. You feel completely invincible. And it's a sort of crazy trip. If someone told me that that this was all something external, I'd be like, oh, okay, maybe I need to be in some lab being like watched. But actually, you just feel amazing. And then in terms of sort of longer term mood, I would say energy really impacts my mood. I think that's the same for a lot of people. But my energy is higher generally. And I have stopped doing them for a little while, because I was just then interested to see, well, what things are changing when I stop. And so I haven't done any cold exposure. Actually, I lie. I do a little cold blast in the shower in the morning, which is so much harder, so much harder. But I do a little blast if I need a little wake up or a little sort of refresh. But otherwise, I haven't been doing it. And I would say that my longer term energy and mood may be less effective. For me, it's the more short term mood effects from the ice bath. And it's interesting because you read a lot about libido and testosterone and the connection there, right? And this was something I was thinking about. And it's, again, an interesting thing. Like, is it a placebo? Are you then thinking that it's having an effect and therefore it's having an effect? I don't know. But I can tell you that the couple of hours after I would have an ice bath, I was certainly feeling more confident, which will have a massive effect on a lot of women for how sexually confident they feel. I felt more sort of energized and alive. I mean, those things are also going to sort of play into that conversation, and whether that situation arises or not. So yeah, I would say perhaps more short term for me, in those respects. But I wouldn't stop. Yeah, I would keep up the practice. We started a little thing at our house called Chill and a Chat on a Saturday morning. And we would prep our ice bath, we'd put a load of ice in, and we'd get a cafetiere full of coffee. And we'd just say, hey, from 10:30, our house is open for an hour. Come by and dip in the ice bath. And I'm not going to lie, it took a little bit of persuading to get anyone to come round in January. But eventually I'll send you some photos because it was really fun and it was
Please.
really social. And the thing that you talk about with oxytocin, when you got in with your partner in Sedona and you forgot everything and you were just laughing and it was funny and it was fun, and then you felt closer afterwards. So Ben and I have done it a lot, got in the ice bath together, but we also would have people around and we would just be like, hey, you and you guys get in together. They might have met 5 minutes ago. They might be already long-standing friends. It might be, me and my partner's fiance. And it's just this whole mix. And then you come out afterwards and everyone's high-fiving and they feel alive and they feel great. And the next time you see each other, you can't help but feel like you have shared an incredibly challenging, difficult, stimulating, energizing, and like bonding experience. You just feel differently towards that person. My dad, though, Thomas, I don't know if you're looking specifically at women, but I know my dad is interested in doing this, and I hope he doesn't mind me outing his age online, but he's 68 and he wants to start an ice bath protocol after listening to your episode with us on degrees of health. And he's interested to do it, but I bought him a blood test kit to make sure he measures it before and after. So
Well
he'll send you
done.
those as well.
It's so funny because I interview these elite athletes. They're in the NFL or the baseball players. I haven't talked to any football players yet, but golfers. Luke Donald and I had a really good conversation. And sometimes they wind up telling me about their dads. Now, I relate to their dads a lot more closely than I relate to them because I'm close in age to the fathers of all these super professional athletes. And they are able to see past where they are in their career right now. They're in peak physical condition and they're making millions of dollars a year. And they're worried about injury recovery and exercise recovery. But here are their dads who are, say, 25 to 35 years older than them. And some of those, the chronic diseases associated with aging are catching up with their parents. And they're telling me, I just spoke with Nick Bosa from the San Francisco 49ers, and that probably means nothing to the European audience, but Nick is at the top of his game and his team went to the Super Bowl and they prepared for their Super Bowl in the ice bath. Nick had a good game. Although they didn't go home with a trophy, the 49ers said, we think these ice baths could be the edge that move us up to the next level. So they're going to install them in their locker room this summer and use them all season. But what did Nick and I wind up talking about? Nick's dad and how he's got his dad now in the ice bath because he's also listening to the podcast about the anti-aging effects and the brown fat and the metabolism and the testosterone. And there's some part of these young men who are looking for that 2.5 or 3% edge in their competition that wants to include their parents, because in a way, the stakes are even higher for dad than they are for Nick. And it makes me want to get Nick's dad, on in the interview and see what's going with him. I would love to talk with your dad and take a look at his labs because there are other men, he's maybe 10 years older than I am, who have sent me lab reports that show their testosterone levels going up even higher than the 1180 nanograms per deciliter that I measured as sort of my record high. I don't think there's any reason that the decline in sex hormones should be associated with aging. I think it's associated with metabolic dysfunction. And we accumulate sort of metabolic injuries, injuries to our mitochondria over the decades of our life when we are not putting ourselves in the environment that promote mitochondrial health. Then we get to be 60 or 65. And we just don't feel the way that we used to. When those conditions that promote mitochondrial health are restored, so is that feeling of energy, and so are the physiological levels of sex hormones. Getting your dad, a blood test kit and saying, here, it's a short little prick of the finger. We're going to get some good data. Let's do it again in a couple of months. That would be a magnificent N=1 study.
I think there's just a couple of critical things here, though, aren't there, Thomas? Like, people have to be willing to be open to try it. And I think quite often the narrative that's perpetuated once you get to that age and those levels are declining is, oh, but that's what happens. That's normal. And as you say, we go back to this, that's normal. But what is normal? Is normal correct? Like, is normal right? I just read Dr. Gabor Mate's book, and it's titled The Myth of Normal.
Oh,
And
good.
he goes through, it's a fascinating book. The sort of subtitle is healing in a toxic culture. And he goes through all of the sort of things that the myths essentially of culture, and what is sort of normalized in us at different stages of our lives, that perhaps need a second look under a magnifying glass, and also just some questions asked about where that originated from and why, and is it still relevant?
Well, there's one more aspect of this that we haven't talked about yet. Are you monitoring your vitamin D?
I do, yes. That was one of the biomarkers in the test.
Vitamin D and testosterone levels in men are closely associated. So they peak during the late summer, that is vitamin D levels. And testosterone tends to ride up with the vitamin D. And then they reach a nadir sometime in February or maybe early March, and at least in the northern hemisphere, because of the seasonality that it is our sun exposure. You now have very long days in the United Kingdom because we are on the verge of the summer solstice, the longer days of the year. We're talking in mid-June, you and I. And it would be quite normal for your vitamin D levels to have gone up over the period of time when you started your ice bath experiment. It's not likely, I don't think, that it would double or nearly double your total T just because your vitamin D is going up. But you're so health conscious that I suspect you're aware that vitamin D in January and February in London is a real challenge. And maybe you've been doing things with your diet or supplements or a UV light to maintain healthy vitamin D levels the whole time. Can you tell me some about that?
I can, and it was one of the ones that was tested. I am very conscious about vitamin D. Just I think as a lot of people are now, just with a little bit more information about it. And as you say, because this test was done in January, the level at which my first test came back was it was okay. It wasn't super low, but it was fine. As we say, in the healthy range. It was fine. But it didn't change that much. It actually barely changed at all. And I don't know whether that's because it would have declined further with the progression of winter had I not been doing the ice baths and my testosterone increasing, or whether it wasn't having any effect and it was just canceling each other out. I don't know. What I would need to do in order to understand that better would perhaps be to do it over the summer and see if there was a difference in vitamin D from the start of the summer, or maybe since my last test versus July or August.
Almost all the testosterone research is done in men. And so we're just beginning to scratch the surface of how can we gather data with respect to women. And men operate on this sort of annual cycle. But you've mentioned it before. Women operate on a monthly cycle and an annual cycle. You said that you were drawing your blood on day 3. For the women who want to replicate for themselves what you did so that they can compare and say, am I doing it right? What instructions would you give them about your day 3? How would you determine day 3 so that they could determine it in the same way?
Oh yeah. So I just did uh day one is the first day of my menstrual cycle, so the first day that I bleed. And so I essentially just count like 1, 2, 3. You have to be quite clever with when you order your test so that it arrives on time, and and then you send it off on the day. um I mean, I don't know if this makes, actually it does make a difference in terms of your cortisol and things like that, but I was very specific about also doing it at the same time of day. um but really just the importance of doing it, because your all of your other hormones, your luteinizing hormone, your FSH, your progesterone, your estrogen, they're all changing dramatically the few days prior, the few days after. And so you just do 24 hours difference, and you've got a like a skewed result
Yep.
basically. um but
What
I'm
time of
also,
day? Sorry,
yeah,
what time of day worked for you to do your finger prick test?
I did it. I did it at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Hmm.
I just did it before I'd eaten anything.
Yep.
Before I'd eaten breakfast, I didn't have any coffee. I didn't have any stimulants. I just woke up. All I had was water. But I'd been awake for a couple of hours, at least 3 hours,
You're
two
such a
hours.
good subject because you're removing all these confounding variables. And I can almost hear, on Twitter, people criticizing these results say, well, that doesn't count because, she wasn't monitoring her vitamin D. Yes, she was. Or she didn't do it at the same time. Yes, she did. Or she didn't, prick on the same hour. Yes, she did. You've done all of these things so that we can isolate the effects of the ice bath and say, if the only thing changed was the ice bath, then it's the only explanation available to us, to describe why you went from 0.6 to 1.1 in your total testosterone. But the next experiment would be to stop doing the ice bath and see if you go back down. Have you thought about that?
That's actually what I'm doing at the moment. So April, when was it? April 6th or something that I did my test. Beginning of April. So April, May, June. It's not long until I'm due my next test. And I haven't done, when did I last? I haven't done an ice bath since April.
I have
So I'll let you
a
know.
guess. It's not a formal hypothesis, but I have a guess. It takes 7 to 10 days to recruit new brown fat, but it takes years to lose it again. That is, if you start a practice during the winter and you're doing sort of polar bear plunge or whatever people do, you can maintain a high level of brown fat all through the summer without ever having to go dip back into the North Sea or something. Brown fat can be gained quickly and lost slowly. So my guess is that your testosterone levels will come down just a little bit. And I cannot wait for you to send me your next lab report, because if my guess is correct, not only am I going to feel like, oh, I'm so smart, but then we're going to be able to reassure a lot of women. You don't have to do this every day for the rest of your life in order to maintain a healthy metabolism. You can do this for a while and then you can take a break. And your body will only slowly sort of repose back into the condition that, honestly, it took decades for you to reach that state of being 31 or 32 and at only 0.5. You will not slide back so fast that we need to be paranoid about getting in the ice bath every day.
I mean, I'll keep doing them. It's fascinating. And at the next junction, after I do the next test, perhaps that's, I could ramp it up again for 3 months,
Yep.
4 months, and see over the summer months. Right at the beginning of this, Thomas, you said the weather is getting warmer. People are wanting to do more ice baths. And it's so funny to me because I enjoy doing an ice bath so much more when it's cold outside. And my learning about this has led me to the conclusion that that is because as soon as you step outside, you're not in the water yet. As soon as you step outside and you're anticipating going in, your body is already starting that adaptation process because you're already getting cold. It's already -1 degrees outside. And your body's saying, this is really chilly, but it's air chilly. And then you get in the water and you've got the hydrostatic pressure of the water all around you, which is totally different to the shower, which is why I said they're completely different experiences. And I find the ice bath easier for that reason, because once you're in, you're in. It's not constantly changing and hitting different parts of your body. And so I find it a lot easier. And what I love about what you do, Thomas, with the Morozko, is when it was really cold here back in January and February, we had these few days where we had like biting weather. It was cold. And Ben and I would wake up so excited because it meant that the ice bath had frozen over. And we had to get our hammer out, and we were there, and we were smacking it to break the ice. And we both said that those were the most fun ice baths that we did, the most exciting plunges, because it was the novelty of the ice, but there was also this feeling that when you're looking at it and you're not in it yet, and you're cold and your body's sort of in the air and you've already started that process, knowing you're going to get in, preparing yourself, there is something about looking at ice that I have this feeling. There's I can't explain it yet, but there's something about looking at ice and your brain registering that's cold water versus just water sitting in a tub. Because you could look at water in your tub, in your bathtub, in your bathroom and think, I don't know what temperature that is. It could be hot, it could be cold, it could be medium, it could be lukewarm. You don't know. But actually there's something about the ice being in it. And so those were our favorite things to do. And so I like winter to do it, but I can totally see why, if you're going to be new to taking the plunge into an ice bath, you'd rather do it in summer when you're hot and you want to cool off and you just want to dip into some really, really chilly waters. I totally understand that.
You brought several things to my mind. The first is there is a medical doctor and a scientist, Tim Noakes. He's in South Africa, but he's worked with the British super endurance swimmer Lewis Pugh. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but Lewis wrote a book. He's swimming at the North Pole and he's swimming in Antarctica. When Lewis Pugh wanted to train for the Antarctic Ocean, he goes down to South Africa and he connects with Tim Noakes. Tim Noakes is supervising Lewis's training. And Noakes noticed that Pugh was elevating his body temperature before he even got in the water. They would get down to the beach and he would be preparing to train. And Noakes is measuring everything. And his body temperature would go up 1.5 degrees C. Noakes coined a phrase called anticipatory thermogenesis. The brown fat in your body is activated by your nervous system. The thermal receptors in your skin have to send a signal to the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus says, wait a minute, what? Oh, we're going to get cold? Okay, activate the brown fat. There's a word. The brown fat is highly innervated. That is, there are a lot of nerve endings that go through the brown fat. And that's so that the hypothalamus can reach the brown fat and activate it. Well, this is a bit of a surprise. To think that the brown fat is so closely connected to the nervous system suggests that perhaps you could control the brown fat from the brain without the thermal receptors having to signal the hypothalamus. And that's exactly what was going on in Lewis Pugh's body. He would look at the ocean, he would anticipate what's going on, and perhaps unconsciously, his brown fat would already activate. The story that you're telling of looking at the ice chunks floating in the water and anticipating what it's going to be like to get into that cold is very familiar to me. If there isn't ice floating in it, then it's sort of boring. I experience the same anxiety, and so do these super tough professional athletes. Another one is Fred Warner from the 49ers. He told me the worst part about the ice bath is the 5 minutes he spends staring down at the ice in his Morozko, trying to get himself psyched up enough to go into the ice bath. Then you're in, and you're like, what was I even worried about? You do feel the hydrostatic pressure. It's very relaxing. The cold showers are easy to start, but they just make me angry. And that's why I hate them. The ice bath is difficult to get going, but once I'm in there, I'm like, well, this is wonderful. I should have done this. What was I even hesitating for? So your experience is quite normal and quite human. And now it's being repeated in the stories that people are telling me and verified by a physician and scientist like Tim Noakes. Yes, this can happen. Wim Hof claims that he can warm his body with the power of his mind. And it is exactly the kind of thing, that even without all of Wim's experience and training, that we're beginning to notice in ourselves. There's one other thing that you've reminded me of, and that is the relationship between sympathetic nervous system activation and brain function. You might not feel like a genius when you're actually in the ice bath. Give me all your long division problems or something like that. It sounds ridiculous. But I got a message from an opera singer in Massachusetts, and he said, I have been experimenting with ice baths, and I found that when I do an ice bath after my opera practice, my memory improves. My practice session is more productive, and I don't need as much rehearsal to memorize the blocking, to memorize the music. And he's singing in a foreign language, to memorize what the meaning of the lyrics is. So I had to go look this up. Our most salient memories are always associated with our most emotional experiences. And there is an evolutionary biological reason for this. Surprise, for example, is a fundamental human emotion, and it can be positive or it can be negative. So your ancient ancestors, they might have, I don't know, found a blueberry patch. Surprise! And everything about their body is organized to remember what it smelled like, what was the wind like, where was the sun, so that wherever they are in the future, all those telltale unconscious signs might orient them better to find the blueberries. But if you're in the blueberry patch and then all of a sudden you confront a bear, surprise, same thing. What were the noises that led up? Your memory is improved by activation of your sympathetic nervous system to enhance your survival. We know this whether it's a birthday party or some devastating, car accident where time slows down and the experience is almost like burnt into our brains. It's the way we are human. So when you say that the novelty and the excitement of getting out there in January and breaking up the ice with the hammer is one of the most memorable events, I'm not surprised at all. The emotional activation of doing this in January and doing this with Ben is a long lasting memory that you can probably access whenever you feel like you need that little extra boost of courage to do a difficult thing.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And we is it Daniel Brennan?
Yeah, you must have seen him on
The
Instagram
opera
too.
singer.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's been so funny watching him in his chest freezer with his singing.
He did
And
one where he was
actually,
taking requests, and somebody said, I want to hear you, sing, I forget what it was, Little Mermaid or something like that.
brilliant, brilliant. And
Yep.
the control that he has. I mean, when I'm in there, my voice is all over the place. So that's such a fascinating variable to play with, isn't it, for someone who needs such control over their voice and their diaphragm that from the inside out is saying, help, this is a very dangerous situation. I'm cold. And he's able to calm, relax, and say it's okay. I've got this. But then perform an aria as well. It's quite incredible. And the fascinating thing that you've picked up there, the relationship, um, the relationship with the happiest and saddest memories being the most memorable. We asked this question to Dr. Wendy Suzuki. She's a neuroscientist in New York City, and she said it's exactly what you were saying. If it's anxiety ridden, if it's extremely happy, if it's extremely sad, if you are really nervous or something was exhilarating, like you've been to a theme park and you remember one specific ride, it's because there was a lot of adrenaline and you were excited but scared, and you remember that because it has invoked such a heightened response in you. And as you say, that the novelty of those particular mornings in the ice baths are the ones that stand out amongst, I don't know how many we've done, a lot, but those stand out the most, as do the ones with our friends, which
Yeah.
I think says a lot. And what I would be interested to explore next, Thomas, is this is very difficult to measure because these would be very subjective results, but taking something and trying to learn it. So I try not to say this now because I think that it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I have not the best memory. And I actively have to, honestly, Thomas, it's terrible. I started reading a book of how to improve your memory, and I can't tell you a single thing that it said. So I've really struggled with this. And my dad's memory isn't very good either, but sort of never has been. That's not a thing to do with age. And so I've been like, right, okay, I need to make this better. So what can I do to make it better? Now, exercise is obviously a massive one. The physical activity and the sort of the blood flow that's going, delivering oxygenated blood to your brain. So that's going to help with memory. But the fascinating thing I would like to try is trying to learn something with and without an ice bath. So just having the stimulus of the ice bath being the different thing, and seeing if it supports in my memory and recall.
I think that's a wonderful experiment.
I think this conversation, I think if there's even a chance that it will increase the interest of women to look at their own biomarkers at all, but testosterone in particular, and just any of their sex hormones, I think that would be a great thing.
I agree. Well, thanks for reaching out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know what, Thomas? It was one of those things where when we spoke last November, you can't rush these things. You have to go through the due process. And I knew I had to wait until January, until our ice bath was there. I had to do my bloods, and then I had to do them the several months, and then I had to measure again. And I was sitting there in November thinking, but I just want to do it now. I just want to send these to Thomas now. And you can't rush it. You can't rush it. And I think, as you've said, the data in aggregate is going to be so interesting. So actually,
Yep.
it's a long game.
Yep. When we're talking about longevity, we should be taking our time.
Absolutely.
Yep.
That's a great little quote.
Yep.
I like that.
Yep.
We should be taking our time. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, well, it's been such a pleasure to speak to you, Thomas.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Take care.